The family I nanny for made me memorize 3 different escape routes from the house, and I needed all of them when their neighbors broke in. The Castellano family hired me on a Thursday in late September, and Miriam spent the first 3 hours teaching me how to leave the house if something went wrong. Not normal emergency procedures like fire drills or tornado shelters. Actual escape routes that involved climbing out second-floor windows, sliding down the garage roof, and cutting through the hedge line into the nature preserve behind their property. She walked me through each route twice, timing me with a stopwatch, correcting my footing when I hesitated at the window ledge. Her 2 kids, 8-year-old Finn and 5-year-old Kara, watched from the hallway with expressions that said they'd done this drill 100 times before. Miriam's husband, Derek, stood in the driveway with his arms crossed, nodding approval when I made it down the trellis without breaking my ankle. He told me the routes weren't paranoia, they were preparation, and that working for them meant taking security seriously. I needed the job badly enough that I didn't ask too many questions. My student loans were crushing me, and the Castellanos paid twice what other families offered, plus full benefits and a housing stipend since I'd be living in their guest house 4 days a week. The estate was massive, sitting on 5 acres in an affluent suburb where every house had gates and cameras and that sterile perfection that screamed old money. The neighbors on the left were the Whitakers, a retired couple who traveled constantly and kept to themselves. The neighbors on the right were the Langs, a family of 4 who'd moved in 6 months earlier. Miriam mentioned the Langs exactly once during my first week, saying I should keep the kids away from their property line and never accept invitations to come over, no matter how friendly Mrs. Lang seemed. When I asked why, Miriam's face went tight and she said some people weren't what they appeared to be, then changed the subject to Kara's peanut allergy. The security measures extended beyond escape routes. Every door had 3 locks, every window had sensors, and cameras covered every angle of the property except inside the bathrooms and bedrooms. Derek checked the footage every night before bed, scanning through hours of nothing happening. The kids weren't allowed to play in the front yard, only the fenced backyard where cameras could monitor them. They couldn't answer the door or the phone. They knew their parents' cell numbers by heart, and had been trained to call 911 if they heard breaking glass or saw anyone on the property who wasn't supposed to be there. Finn told me matter-of-factly that his parents had enemies, people who wanted to hurt them because of something that happened before he was born. He said it the same way other kids talked about their parents' boring office jobs. I'd been working there for 3 weeks when I met Leonard Lang for the first time. I was helping Kara practice her letters in the backyard when a soccer ball came flying over the fence and landed near the swing set. A man appeared at the fence line seconds later, tall and athletic with an easy smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He called out an apology for the ball and introduced himself as Leonard from next door. He said his kids were always kicking balls over here and offered to come grab it if that was okay. I remembered Miriam's warning about staying away from the Langs and told him I'd throw it back over. Leonard's smile faltered just slightly before returning brighter. He thanked me and mentioned that his wife had tried inviting Miriam over for coffee a few times, but never got a response. Joked that maybe the Castellanos were too fancy for neighborhood friendships. I tossed the ball over without responding and steered Kara back toward the house, feeling Leonard's eyes on my back the entire walk. That night, I mentioned the encounter to Miriam, and her reaction was immediate. She wanted to know exactly what Leonard said, how close he got to the fence, whether he tried to talk to Kara. When I described the interaction, she closed her eyes and took a slow breath, then told me something I wasn't expecting. The Langs had moved in specifically to be next to them. Leonard Lang was the brother of a man named Christopher Lang, who'd gone to prison 8 years ago because Derek testified against him in a corporate fraud case. Christopher had embezzled millions from the investment firm where he and Derek both worked, and Derek had been the whistleblower who brought evidence to the FBI. Christopher got 15 years. His family lost everything, and now his brother had purchased the house next door using a shell company to hide the connection, waiting for the right moment to get revenge. Miriam said they had restraining orders and police reports and lawyers involved, but Leonard was careful, never crossing any legal lines, just existing next door like a constant threat. Derek came home while Miriam was explaining this, still wearing his suit from work, and he added more context that made the situation even worse. Leonard's wife, Patricia, had been Christopher's secretary and was in love with him, had visited him every week in prison for 8 years, and blamed Derek for destroying the man she loved. Their 2 teenage sons had grown up hearing stories about evil Derek Castellano, who ruined their uncle's life, who took their college funds and their mother's happiness. The whole family was united in their hatred, and moving next door was psychological warfare. Derek said Leonard would stand at the fence line some mornings just staring at the house, never saying anything, never doing anything, just watching. He'd leave threatening notes in their mailbox, never signed, always vague enough to avoid criminal charges. He'd called CPS on them twice with fake abuse reports that went nowhere but required investigations that traumatized the kids. He was methodical and patient and waiting for an opportunity. The escape routes suddenly made perfect sense. These weren't abstract emergency plans. They were specifically designed to get away from the Langs if they ever decided to stop waiting and actually do something. Miriam showed me a file folder filled with incident reports, photos of Leonard standing at the fence, screenshots of Patricia's social media posts that were just barely this side of legal threats, She showed me court documents where the Castellanos had tried to get the restraining order extended to include proximity to the property, but the judge said the Langs had every right to live in a house they purchased legally. Derek had installed the most advanced security system money could buy, but that didn't help the constant psychological pressure of living next to people who openly hated you. Finn had nightmares about the Lang teenagers breaking into his room. Kara wouldn't play outside anymore unless I was standing right next to her, and I realized I'd walked into something far more complicated than a normal nanny position. The first strange thing happened on a Thursday morning while the kids were at school, and I was cleaning up breakfast dishes. I heard voices in the backyard and looked out to see Patricia Lang standing on her side of the fence talking to someone I couldn't see. She was animated, gesturing widely, and her voice carried across the yard even though I couldn't make out words. Then she held up her phone, took a photo of the Castellano house, and laughed. Just laughed in this high, manic way that made my skin crawl. I grabbed my own phone and took a photo of her photographing the house, then texted it to Miriam. She responded immediately saying not to engage, to stay inside, to document everything. 10 minutes later, Patricia was gone, but the interaction left me rattled. What was she planning? What did she need photos for? The questions circled in my mind all day. That night, Derek came home with a new piece of equipment, a panic button disguised as a regular light switch in the hallway. If I ever flipped it in a specific pattern, 3 quick toggles, it would silently alert a private security company who'd dispatch immediately and also notify police that there was an active threat. He made me practice the pattern until I could do it without thinking, until my fingers knew the rhythm. 3 quick flips. Security notified. Police dispatched. He said the average response time was 6 minutes, which meant I needed to keep the kids safe for 6 minutes if anything happened. He asked if I understood the responsibility I was taking on by working for them, if I was prepared to protect Finn and Kara if the Langs ever made their move. I said yes because the kids were already attached to me, and I couldn't imagine abandoning them. But that night in the guest house, I lay awake wondering what I'd actually signed up for. The next incident came 2 days later, early morning before the kids woke up. I was making coffee when I noticed the back gate was open, swinging slightly in the breeze. I knew for certain Derek had locked it the night before because I'd watched him check it twice. I texted him immediately and he called back within seconds, telling me to get inside, lock all the doors, and watch the camera feeds. He said he was calling the police. I pulled up the security app on my phone and scrolled back through the night footage, and at 3:47 a.m., a figure in dark clothing and a mask had climbed the fence, opened the gate from the inside, and walked around the backyard for almost 10 minutes. They'd looked in windows, tried door handles, stood at the sliding glass door peering inside. Then they'd left the gate open deliberately, a message that they could get in whenever they wanted. The police came and took a report but said without seeing the person's face, there was no way to prove it was Leonard or anyone from the Lang family. The footage showed someone approximately Leonard's height and build, but that wasn't enough for charges. Miriam decided to keep the kids home from school that day, and we had what she called a security review. She walked everyone through all 3 escape routes again, this time with more urgency. Route 1 was out Finn's bedroom window, down the trellis, through the side yard and into the nature preserve. Route 2 was out Kara's window, onto the garage roof, down the oak tree and over the back fence. Route 3 was the master bedroom window with a rope ladder Derek kept hidden in the closet, down into the garden and through a gap in the hedge that was invisible unless you knew where to look. Each route ended at a different rally point in the preserve where we'd meet up before calling for help. Miriam made me recite the routes from memory, made me draw a map, made me explain what I'd do if one route was blocked. The kids sat on the floor playing with their toys like this was totally normal, like every family did emergency drills before breakfast. That afternoon while the kids napped, I did something I probably shouldn't have. I Googled Christopher Lang and found news articles from 8 years ago about the fraud case. Derek had been painted as a hero, the honest employee who couldn't stay silent while his colleagues stole from clients. Christopher had been charismatic and popular, and his arrest had shocked everyone who knew him. The articles mentioned his wife filing for divorce during the trial, his brother Leonard speaking at sentencing about how the charges would destroy Christopher's life, his secretary Patricia sobbing in the courtroom when the guilty verdict came down. But deeper in the archives I found something else. An article from 2 years after Christopher went to prison. Leonard had been arrested for aggravated assault after attacking a former colleague of Christopher's in a parking lot. The charges were eventually dropped due to lack of evidence, but the article mentioned that Leonard had become obsessed with his brother's case and believed Derek Castellano had framed Christopher. The assault victim had testified at Christopher's trial, and Leonard had broken 2 of his ribs and given him a concussion. I showed the article to Derek when he got home, and his face went gray. He said he'd known about the assault but hadn't realized the connection was in the public record, hadn't thought I'd go looking. He sat down heavily and told me something he'd kept from Miriam, that Leonard had sent him a letter 6 months ago, before moving in next door. The letter said Derek had taken 8 years of Christopher's life, and Leonard was going to take something equivalent from Derek. Not money, not career, but something Derek loved more than anything. Derek had shown the letter to police, but again, it was too vague to be considered a direct threat. He'd hired security consultants who told him to document everything, to install cameras, to prepare his family for the worst. And now here we were, living in a fortress, while the enemy sat 20 yards away waiting for an opening. The breaking point came on a Monday evening in late October. Miriam and Derek had gone to a mandatory work dinner, some corporate event Derek couldn't skip without risking his job. They'd debated canceling, but Leonard had been quiet for 2 weeks and they thought maybe the increased security had scared him off. They left detailed instructions, told me to keep all the doors locked, to check the cameras every 30 minutes, to call immediately if anything seemed wrong. The kids and I made dinner together, chicken nuggets and mac and cheese, the kind of easy comfort food that made them happy. Finn was telling me about a project he was doing on the solar system when I heard glass breaking downstairs. My whole body went cold. I grabbed both kids and pulled them into Finn's room, locked the door, and opened the security app on my phone. 3 men were in the house. They'd smashed through the sliding glass door and were moving through the first floor with purpose, not stealing anything, just searching. I flipped the panic button switch 3 times, felt the satisfying click that meant security was alerted, and pulled out my phone to call 911. Before I could dial, I heard footsteps pounding up the stairs. They weren't even trying to be quiet. Someone tried Finn's door handle and found it locked, then started kicking. The wood splintered on the 3rd kick. I grabbed Kara and Finn and shoved them toward the window. Route 1. Out the window, down the trellis, through the side yard to the preserve. Finn went first because he was older and knew the way. Then I lifted Kara out while the door frame cracked behind us. I climbed out just as the door burst open and I saw Leonard Lang standing there, his face twisted with rage and satisfaction. He lunged for me, but I was already dropping onto the trellis, scraping my hands on the rough wood as I climbed down as fast as I could. The kids were already running for the side yard and I sprinted after them, hearing Leonard's voice behind us yelling for someone named Mitchell to cut them off at the front. We made it through the side yard into the preserve, but as we hit the tree line, I saw flashlight beams ahead of us at the rally point. Someone was waiting there, had anticipated Route 1. I grabbed both kids and changed direction, angling back toward the house. Route 2. We had to get to the garage roof. The kids were crying but staying quiet, trained well enough to know silence meant survival right now. We circled back around through the neighbor's yard, the Whitakers who were thankfully traveling in Europe, and approached the Castellano house from a different angle. I could see figures moving inside through the windows, tearing through rooms looking for us. The garage was detached, and we managed to get around back where a drainage pipe provided handholds up to the roof. I boosted Finn up first, then Kara, then pulled myself up, my arms shaking with adrenaline and fear. From the garage roof, we could reach Kara's bedroom window. I'd practiced this route but never thought I'd actually use it. Never imagined doing it while men hunted us below. The window was locked from inside. Of course it was locked. Miriam locked everything. I used my elbow to break the glass as quietly as I could, reached through and unlatched it. The sound of breaking glass carried and I heard someone shout. We had maybe 30 seconds. I lifted Kara through first, then Finn, then squeezed through myself, cutting my arm on broken glass. We were in Kara's room on the 2nd floor, but now there were footsteps in the upstairs hallway. Route 2 was compromised. We needed Route 3. The master bedroom was 3 doors down. I picked up Kara because she was too small to run fast enough and grabbed Finn's hand, and we moved into the hallway. A man I didn't recognize was coming up the stairs, young, maybe one of Leonard's sons. He saw us and yelled. I shoved the kids into the master bedroom and slammed the door, dragging the dresser in front of it while Finn and Kara ran to the window. Derek's rope ladder was in the closet like he'd promised. I hooked it to the window frame anchors and threw it out, trying not to think about how high up we were, how dark it was outside, how the kids had only practiced this twice. Finn went first, brave kid, climbing down hand over hand into the garden below. Kara was crying harder now, and I had to essentially carry her down, one arm around her waist, while I used my other hand to control our descent. The bedroom door was splintering behind us, someone hitting it with what sounded like a battering ram. We hit the ground and I grabbed Kara's hand, looking for Finn in the darkness. He was already at the hedge line, waiting at the invisible gap Miriam had shown us. I heard the master bedroom door crash open above us, just as we slipped through the hedge into the preserve beyond. This rally point was deeper in the woods, a quarter-mile from the house, marked by a distinctive lightning-struck tree. We ran through the darkness, branches whipping our faces, the kids' breath coming in gasps. I had my phone out ready to call 911, but I'd lost signal somewhere between the hedge and here. We reached the lightning tree and I pulled both kids behind it, all of us breathing hard, trying to stay silent. I could hear voices back at the house, someone arguing about which direction we'd gone. Finn whispered that he wanted his mom and I told him she was coming, that help was coming, that we just had to stay hidden. Kara was shaking uncontrollably and I wrapped my jacket around her, trying to warm her up while my own teeth chattered. Minutes crawled by. 5 minutes. 8 minutes. Where was the security company? Where were the police? Had the panic button worked? I tried my phone again and finally got 1 bar of signal. I dialed 911 and the dispatcher answered, asking for my location. I tried to explain we were in the nature preserve behind the Castellano house, that we'd been attacked, that there were men in the house. She said police were already en route, multiple units ETA 3 minutes. She told me to stay hidden and keep the line open. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Patricia Lang's voice, calling out in a sing-song way that we couldn't hide forever, that this was just the beginning of what the Castellanos deserved. She was in the preserve, searching for us. Other voices joined hers, spreading out through the woods with flashlights cutting through the darkness. They were doing a grid search. The kids and I moved deeper into the preserve, away from the lightning tree, further from the house, but also further from help. I kept the dispatcher on the line, whispering our movements. She kept saying police were almost there, just hold on. Just stay quiet. Kara stumbled over a root and cried out before I could stop her. The flashlights immediately turned in our direction. Patricia's voice called out that she heard us, that we should just come out and make this easier on everyone. Footsteps crashed through the underbrush toward us. I made a decision. I told Finn to take Kara and run west, toward the road on the far side of the preserve where I knew there was a gas station with lights and people. I showed him the direction and made him repeat it back to me. I said I'd lead the searchers away, that he was in charge of keeping his sister safe, that his parents would be so proud of how brave he was being. Finn's eyes were huge in his pale face, but he nodded and took Kara's hand. I waited until they'd gotten a head start. Then I stood up and ran in the opposite direction, deliberately making noise, snapping branches, letting my phone's flashlight bounce around. The pursuers immediately changed course, following me instead of the kids. Patricia's voice called out triumphantly that she saw me, that I couldn't get away. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, thorns tearing at my clothes, my lungs burning, my cut arm throbbing. I could hear them behind me, gaining ground. I burst out of the tree line onto someone's back lawn, a house I didn't recognize, and started screaming for help. Lights came on inside the house. A man appeared at the back door and I screamed at him to call 911, that people were chasing me. He pulled out his phone just as Leonard Lang emerged from the trees behind me. Leonard stopped when he saw the man, saw the phone, realized the situation had gotten away from him. Patricia and two younger men came out of the woods behind Leonard, all of them breathing hard, all of them staring at me with such hatred that I actually backed up a step. Then I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Police sirens, multiple cars, getting closer. Leonard's expression shifted from rage to panic. He turned to run, but police cars were suddenly everywhere, flooding the neighborhood with lights and sound. Officers poured out with weapons drawn, shouting commands. Leonard and his family dropped to the ground and I collapsed onto the grass, shaking so hard I thought I might never stop. An officer reached me first, a woman with kind eyes who wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and asked if I was hurt. I told her about the kids, that I'd sent them toward the gas station, that they were alone and scared. She immediately radioed it in and officers were dispatched to find them. The homeowner whose yard I'd crashed into brought me water and stayed with me while I gave my statement to the police. I watched them arrest Leonard, Patricia, and what turned out to be their two sons, Mitchell and Ryan, all four of them screaming that Derek Castellano had this coming, that this was justice for Christopher. A fifth person was arrested coming out of the Castellano house. A man I later learned was Christopher Lang's former lawyer, who'd apparently been orchestrating this whole plan. They'd wanted to kidnap Finn and Kara, hold them for days while Derek suffered the way Christopher suffered, make him feel powerless and desperate. The broken home invasion was just the beginning of a much larger plan that had taken them months to coordinate. Miriam and Derek arrived 15 minutes later, having been pulled out of their dinner by the security company's alert. Miriam's face when she saw me was pure terror, asking where her babies were. I told her I'd sent them to the gas station and she actually cried, grabbing me in a hug so tight I couldn't breathe. Derek was already on his phone coordinating with police to locate the kids. We drove to the gas station in a patrol car and found Finn and Kara sitting inside with the manager who'd called the police as soon as two scared children appeared asking for help. Kara ran to Miriam sobbing and Finn stood there trying to be brave until Derek picked him up and he finally broke down. The family held each other while I stood off to the side, suddenly aware of how much I was shaking, how my cut arm was bleeding through my sleeve, how my hands were scraped raw from the trellis. The next few hours were a blur of statements and evidence collection and medical treatment for minor injuries. The EMTs bandaged my arm and treated my scrapes while I answered the same questions over and over for different officers. Detective Simmons, who'd been assigned to the case, told me the Langs had been planning this for 6 months. They'd installed surveillance equipment in their own house to monitor the Castellanos' patterns. They'd mapped the property, identified weaknesses in the security system, recruited Christopher's former lawyer who had his own grudge against Derek. The plan had been to take the kids, hide them in a property Leonard owned upstate, and send Derek proof-of-life videos demanding he confess to framing Christopher. They'd expected the nanny to freeze or comply out of fear, hadn't anticipated someone would actually fight back and use the escape routes. Leonard had apparently complained in his police interview that the escape routes were an unfair advantage, which would have been funny if the whole situation wasn't so horrifying. The charges against the Lang family and their accomplice were extensive: home invasion, attempted kidnapping, conspiracy, assault, stalking, harassment, and about a dozen other charges the prosecutor kept adding as they went through the evidence. Judge set bail at $2 million each, which none of them could afford, so they sat in jail awaiting trial. Derek hired additional security for the house and the family decided to move as soon as they could sell the property. They couldn't stay somewhere that held so much trauma, couldn't live next to the empty Lang house that stood as a reminder of what had almost happened. I offered to stay on until they moved, but Miriam said I'd done enough, that I'd saved her children's lives and she could never adequately repay that debt. She insisted on covering my full tuition for my remaining 3 years of college, set up a fund for my future, gave me recommendations that would open doors anywhere I wanted to work. The trial happened 8 months later. I testified for 3 hours about the night of the attack, walking the jury through every decision, every moment of fear, every second of the escape routes being used exactly as they were designed. The defense tried to paint the Langs as desperate family members driven to extremes by Derek's original betrayal, but the jury wasn't sympathetic to people who'd terrorized children. Guilty verdicts on all counts. Leonard got 15 years, the same sentence his brother had received. Patricia got 12. The sons got 10 each because they were younger and less involved in the planning. Christopher's lawyer got 8 years for conspiracy. During the sentencing hearing, Leonard actually smiled at Derek and said they'd finally gotten justice, that Derek now knew what it felt like to live in fear. The judge told him that wasn't justice, it was revenge, and there was a difference. 3 years later, I graduated with honors and started working for a nonprofit that helps families escape domestic violence situations. The Castellanos moved to a different state, and I still get Christmas cards showing Finn and Kara growing up happy and safe. Miriam writes that Kara wants to be a teacher and Finn wants to be a police officer, that both kids are in therapy but doing well, that they still talk about the night their nanny saved them. Sometimes I think about those escape routes and how strange it was to practice them, how paranoid it seemed at the time. But those routes made the difference between the kids being taken or being saved. Preparation wasn't paranoia when the threat was real. The Langs spent years planning their revenge, but the Castellanos spent years preparing their defense. In the end, the preparation won. Sometimes I dream about running through those woods with Kara's hand in mine, about the sound of breaking glass and Patricia's voice in the darkness. But then I wake up and remember that the kids are safe, that the people who tried to hurt them are locked away, and that sometimes the good guys actually win. That has to be enough. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.